Every Camino is a learning experience. Today I'd like to share some lessons I learned on the Via de la Plata and Camino Sanabrés. Primero, mi español no es bueno, y hoy pronunciaré mal muchos nombres de lugares. The Via de la Plata is the Camino route that starts in Sevilla in southern Spain. This map shows the most popular Camino routes and provides some geographic context for the Via de la Plata. There are a number of less traveled Camino routes that feed into the Via de la Plata. Of these, the Via Augusta goes from Cadiz to Sevilla, and the Camino Mozorabe starts in Almería and connects with the Via de la Plata in Merida. The Via de la Plata proper runs from Sevilla to Astorga. Pilgrims going to Santiago de Compostela have two main choices. One, they can follow the Via de la Plata all the way to Astorga and then take the Camino Frances to Santiago. Or they can leave the Via de la Plata earlier and take the Camino Sanabrés to Santiago. Here are some comparisons between the popular Camino Frances and the Via de la Plata. The Frances is about 800 kilometers, and the Via de la Plata is a little over 1,000 kilometers. To get a sense of the number of people walking the Via de la Plata, I looked at the number of Compostelas issued in the month of May this year, when I walked, and in the same month pre-pandemic. The numbers for those starting in Sevilla are less than 10% of those starting in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. There's no Brierley guide for the Via de la Plata. So for planning, I use the gronze.com website, which has a reputation for having the most up-to-date information on accommodations on the Camino routes, the free Via de la Plata guide by Gerald Kelly, and the Camino Forum. The Via de la Plata subforum has an excellent thread pinned to the top of the forum that discusses stages and what to see. There's also a guide published by Cicerone, but I didn't use that at all. And Wise Pilgrim also has a Plata app. Gronze says the signage on the Via de la Plata is generally good, but it's normal to get lost occasionally. So I think a mapping app is required for this route. The Gronze Maps app most accurately shows the route of the yellow arrows, but it's not perfect, and it doesn't show other walking routes. Mappy frequently shows an older or alternate route for the Camino, but the route will work, and importantly, it shows other walking and biking trails in the area. And then there are many people that use the Buen Camino app. The screenshots here all show the first stage out of Sevilla. There is an alternate route immediately after crossing the river, which is shown differently on each app. And the route in the middle of the stage, if you look, was changed in early 2024 to avoid a stream crossing. And those are shown differently. Mappy showing the old route, Gronze showing the new route, and Buen Camino actually showing both. I arrived in Sevilla on a Sunday afternoon. I had some dinner, walked around, and went to a flamenco performance. The Giralda is the most prominent structure in Sevilla. Originally a minaret of the mosque, it was converted to a bell tower after Sevilla was conquered by Christians in 1248. The name Giralda comes from the Spanish word girar, meaning to spin, and is so named because of the weather vane on top. The Giralda was the architectural inspiration for the ferry building tower in San Francisco. The Amigos del Camino de Santiago en Sevilla office is located in the Triana neighborhood next to the Guadalquivir River. At the time of Columbus, ocean-going ships could sail up this river to Sevilla. Since then, the river is silted up and large ships can no longer reach Sevilla. The Pilgrim's Office provided some helpful updates on the trail conditions. March 2025 had been the rainiest March ever in Sevilla, and with a couple of route options leaving Sevilla, it was great to have the local recommendations. So first lesson learned was always check in with the local pilgrim office if there is one. I started my Camino by enjoying the fragrant orange blossoms along the streets near the cathedral. The oranges that they plant in Sevilla are sour. They plant sour oranges because they are more fragrant. And when they are harvested, they are mostly shipped to England to make marmalade. Via de la Plata translates to the Silver Way in English, but the origin of the Plata in the route's name is believed to have actually been a phonetic evolution of the Arabic word balata, meaning paved road. But the paved road doesn't sound nearly as romantic as the Silver Way. Outside of Sevilla, the archaeological site of the Roman city of Italica was founded in 206 AD as a place for wounded troops to recover and a residence for war veterans. It was the birthplace of the emperors Trajan and Adriano, and under the Emperor Augustus, the city came to be one of the most advanced cities in the Roman world at the time. Sites included a theater for plays, this amphitheater, and a town center. The lesson learned was the Iberian Peninsula was a significant part of the Roman Empire, and you don't always get a sense of that on the Frances and other northern routes. Much of that first stage is a former railroad right-of-way. Despite the warnings from the Pilgrim Office the previous day, the trail was mostly in pretty good shape, but my shoes and pants were still covered with mud. Lots of tree anemone flowers along the route. Um, so, lesson learned, don't gripe about the rain. The rain earlier in the month resulted in lots of wildflowers in bloom during the first week of spring. After leaving Guiana, the Camino followed tracks through wildflower fields and olive orchards, and then the second half of the stage was mostly through oak woodland and meadow. Like other Camino routes, sometimes there are stretches where you have to walk on or along a roadway. That was the case with the first 16 kilometers on this day. There were 7 people in the albergue the previous night. 6 of them took a cab for the first 16 kilometers. I walked. And despite the pavement, which was actually only for 8 kilometers, the scenery was nice and there was plenty of room on the shoulder to walk when a car passed by, which wasn't very often. Lesson learned, don't follow the herd. After that long stretch of roadway, the afternoon was a beautiful walk through the El Berrico estate, a natural parkland. Easy rolling hills up until about the 25-kilometer point. Then there was a short, steep uphill over this ridge for about 1 kilometer, going over the ridge there. And then the path down the hill to Almaden de la Plata. Like other Camino routes, there are a variety of accommodations available. But because there are many fewer people walking, there are correspondingly fewer accommodations along the way. I chose to stay in albergues or hostels most nights. I think 39 of 45 nights. Spring is the busiest time for people walking the Via de la Plata, so the albergues were usually full. Uh, this picture, my bunk is on the bottom right there. And the Via de la Plata continued in the natural parkland of the Sierra Norte. This was a short day. The next accommodations after El Real de la Jara is 20 kilometers away, so I chose to take it easy with only a 13-kilometer day. And there were lots of horses roaming free through this section. Uh, Very beautiful horses and wildflowers. Right after starting the next day, I came to this stream. I looked around in both directions to see if there was a way to cross without getting my feet wet. I finally decided that I was going to have to wade across and was about to take my shoes off when a car came up behind me. The driver asked if I wanted a ride across the stream and I accepted. I got out on the other side. So there are about 25 meters of the Via de la Plata that I didn't actually walk. The Dehesa is a vast area of forested rangeland in southern and central Spain. The backbone of the Dehesa consists of ancient oaks that dot the landscape. The Dehesa is also the home of Spain's most iconic domesticated animals. This is where the famous Iberico pig wanders among the oaks, feasting on acorns. The Via de la Plata starts in Andalusia and just before Monasterio crosses into Extremadura. In Extremadura, the Via de la Plata is marked with granite cubes with the top edge to symbolize the Roman road with a quadriform arch, which we will see later. And on the side is either a blue square, a yellow square, or a combined blue and yellow square. A yellow square indicates that this is marking the current route. A blue square indicates that it's marking the original Roman route. And the combined square indicates that the current path is on the old Roman road. So I finally had to get my feet wet. Took off my shoes and socks, waded across the stream, found the small towel in my pack and dried my feet. Put my shoes and socks back on and continued on my way. The scenery was now mostly fields of grain, and on this day it was mostly barley. The route continues through olive orchards and vineyards. I was surprised by how many vineyards there were in Extremadura. I was familiar with regions like La Rioja and Rías Baixas, but thought it would have been too hot during the summer in Extremadura for wine grapes. Bud break was just beginning in this area. But lesson learned, Extremadura is a huge wine growing region. Zafra was the first city of any size after Sevilla. Zafra is very traditionally Spanish when it comes to mealtime, and so restaurants don't open until 8 p.m. Several pilgrims, including me, had not reached town in time for lunch and were looking for a place to eat around 5 p.m. We didn't find anything. Finally, we found a Chinese restaurant that would serve us at 7 p.m. and we ate there. So again, lesson learned. Be aware of local traditions and carry some spare food. Villafranca de los Barros calls itself the City of Music. The streets in the pedestrian center of town are paved with mosaics of musical instruments. Unfortunately, there was no music events in town the night I was there. On other Camino routes, especially the Camino Frances, there are bars, cafes, or restaurants along the way where you can stop for lunch or a snack. But many stages of the Via de la Plata have no places to stop for food or water. So it was necessary to buy food for lunch at a market before setting out in the morning. I would sometimes pick up some bread and ham and cheese for a sandwich. But these hams were not what I was looking for. So the lesson learned was meal planning is important, and one must also consider the hours that the stores are open and purchase food supplies when you can. The Via de la Plata continued through the vineyards and olive orchards. This day had one stretch of 12 kilometers that was perfectly straight, due north, and the vineyards to the left and right just seemed to stretch to the horizon. I would note that on the distances and stages at the bottom of the charts, the asterisk next to the kilometers indicates that there is no intermediate services on that stage, that there's no bars, cafes, restaurants, shops of any sort, or water fountains along the way. The Roman theater in Merida was built in about 15 BC as part of an entertainment complex that included an adjacent amphitheater. The theater has been renovated many times since then and is currently home to a classical theater festival each year. On this day, there are a bunch of school kids on field trips watching the play, apparently a comedy from the amount of laughing from the audience. While there are many muddy spots on the trail, it didn't rain on me until the day we left Merida. As a result, I took only a couple pictures of the Roman aqueduct that had once provided water to the city. So not only were there no places to eat or get water along many stages, generally there was no good place to sit either. I usually just sat on the ground next to the trail to eat my lunch. This day I was happy to find the base of this cross to sit and rest on. As I approached the town Alquiscar, I had to step aside as a parade of horses and carts went by. This was an annual equestrian rally that starts in the town and they ride up to the top of Sierra de Montantes. This lasted about 15 minutes before we were able to continue, and there was quite a few horses straggling after that. They all seemed to be having a good time. Many of the carts had cup holders that appeared to contain empty beer cans. The lesson learned. It helps to know a little Spanish, especially the phrase, ¿Por qué la fiesta? Roman engineers placed granite cylinders at regular intervals along Roman roads, including the Via de la Plata. They each identified the distance to the nearest town. The town was expressed in units of 1,000 Roman double steps, known as millia passum. This distance has evolved in what we now call a mile, and the cylinders, or milarium, we call milestones. You can see the water on the trail behind this stone. That was got to be a recurring situation. Caceres was founded by the Romans in 25 BC, but archaeological sites indicate that the area was inhabited long before then. The city has a blend of Roman, Moorish, Northern Gothic, and Italian Renaissance architecture, with 30 towers from the Islamic period still standing. The old town still has its medieval walls and shows few signs of modern life, making it a popular site for filming TV shows and movies. I arrived in Casar de Caceres mid-morning and basically had a rest day. The woman at the tourist office directed us to a restaurant called Casa Claudio on the other side of town for an inexpensive menu del dia lunch. The restaurant turned out to be quite nice, and we had a wonderful lunch. Our small group bonded over this lunch and walked the rest of the way to Santiago together. From right to left, we were Lily, who's currently living in Florida, but originally from Colombia, South America. This was her fourth Camino. Jordis is from Germany, and she could only walk with us for a couple weeks before she had to fly home to work. Linus is from Lithuania and was on his seventh Camino. And Nuria is from Barcelona and was on her eighth Camino. She had started in Almeria and walked the Camino Mozarabe for about 3 weeks before it joined the Via de la Plata in Merida. Lesson learned, ask the locals for restaurant recommendations. The longest stage we had was 33.1 kilometers, much of it through pasture land, and there were no towns of any sort along the way. The Camino passed the Alcantara Reservoir, which was a good place to stop and sit by the side of the trail and eat my lunch. This reservoir is on the Tajo River, which flows west and is called the Tajo or Tagus River as it flows by Lisbon to the Atlantic Ocean. So, the geography lesson, the major rivers that flow by Lisbon and Porto start in Spain. And seeing our destination on this long day was a welcome sight, but there was still almost 2 hours of walking left. A blustery morning. You could see the pollen blowing off the trees, and my allergies kicked in for the first time on any of my caminos. So the lesson so the lesson learned, bring your allergy medicine. But the wind died down and the approach to the walled city or town of Galisteo was pretty and gentle. The wall dates from the 12th century. After a couple of long days, and with a couple more long days to come, I was glad that this day's walk wasn't any longer. The lesson learned was that for me, short, 10 to 12 kilometer days worked better as rest days than taking the entire day off from walking. Gronze calls the next 2 days the Queen stage of the Via de la Plata. From Carcaboso to Aldo de Nueva del Camino is a 38.3 kilometer stage according to the guides. With rain forecasted, we decided to detour off the route for about 6 kilometers in order to break the stage in two. The trail was quite scenic, but the detour to the albergue was on a really busy road. And as I said, this was a beautiful stretch. The rain made it trail really muddy and swampy, so most of the time we were concentrating on the swampy ground in front of us rather than the surrounding scenery. Palm Sunday started out in a quiet fog. The first 6 kilometers were on a lonely dirt road to get back to the actual Via de la Plata. And perhaps the most iconic point on the Via de la Plata is the Caparra Arch, a Roman quadriform, that is, four-sided arch that the Plata passes under. Unfortunately, the iconic arch is undergoing some restoration and was covered with scaffolding. It's unfortunate for me, but probably beneficial in the future. By this time, I was getting the hang of wading across streams. The previous day's rain made this crossing a little more challenging. So the lesson learned was bring poles, even if you don't use them much. The mostly flat trails of the Via de la Plata in Extremadura end with a climb up the hill that will mark our entry into the region of Castilla y León. We frequently would start early in the morning at first light in order to complete a stage before the forecasted afternoon rain. The local church runs the albergue in Fuente Roble de Salvatierra. The albergue is donativo and has a communal dinner. Our room had a wood-burning stove for heat. The local parish priest conducted a pilgrim gathering and blessing in the local church that evening before dinner. It rained overnight, and the next morning was cold, about 34 degrees when I got started. At one point, I looked back to see the nearby mountains covered with snow. Linus's friend Erica from Tracy, California, joined us this morning. She has walked other caminos but was surprised to learn that there are often no places to stop for coffee on the Via de la Plata. Salamanca is home to Spain's oldest university and two cathedrals. We had another wonderful lunch, and it was a great day for sightseeing in the old town. When I started this walk in Sevilla, I planned to walk only as far as Salamanca, spend Easter weekend here, and then fly home. I expected the Via de la Plata to be a solitary experience, and that 4 weeks of isolation would be as much as I could handle. But during the first 3 weeks, I met a lot of people and enjoyed the social aspect of this Camino more than any of my previous Caminos. So I decided to keep going to Santiago. Here we are enjoying drinks and tapas in the evening on Salamanca's main square. The square that was full of people at bars and cafes Thursday evening was the site of Holy Week processions on Good Friday morning. I like watching the girl next to her dad here in the middle. So I watched the processions for a short while, but wanted to get back on the trail. It didn't take long to get through the outskirts of Salamanca and back into farm country. We again got to the albergue in time to beat the afternoon rain, and it rained heavily off and on all afternoon and night. But the next morning, the rain had stopped, but the trail was really muddy again. On Easter Sunday, we crossed the Douro River into Zamora. By the time we got there, the Holy Week processions were over. This is the river that runs through the Douro wine region of Portugal and down to Porto. Some of us spent the afternoon touring the local castle and cathedral. We were not there in time to attend Easter Mass, but toured the incense smoke-filled cathedral afterwards. Wikipedia says that Holy Week in Zamora is well known for its soberness. Apparently, they make up for that after Easter Mass. This clip is from the Plaza Mayor as we are looking for a place to eat. So several of the people that we had been walking with were heading home that evening or the next morning. So we had some sad goodbyes with those who didn't have time to continue to Santiago. The next day, a bicyclist sped past me on a very muddy section of the trail, which annoyed me as I jumped out of the way. About 30 yards past me, the bike slid out from under her, and she landed completely submerged in a big mud puddle. I started to run to help her, well, after I stopped laughing a little bit. But then I slipped in the mud. And her partner was behind her and helped her get up. I managed to get up on my own and finish the day with more mud-covered clothes. Both mapping applications show the Camino going across this lake, kind of from the left side here and then across the lake and up along the Amrita on the other side. This did not appear to be a stream that I wanted to wade across, and luckily just off to the right is a road with a bridge across the lake. Granja de la Moreruela is where pilgrims to Santiago must decide if they're going to take the Camino Sanabrés or continue to Astorga on the Via de la Plata. Even though the distance for the two routes is about the same, it seems that the vast majority of pilgrims opt for the Camino Sanabrés. That was the case with everyone that I had met along the way. I believe this is because most people walking the Via del Plata have walked the Camino Frances before and would rather walk a different route than repeat the last 11 days of the Camino Frances. And those that have not walked the Camino Frances before have chosen the Via del Plata specifically for a more solitary experience than is found on the Camino Frances. So we turned west, and except for a mile or two walking on the road so that we could cross this bridge, it was a nice trail and very pretty scenery. Spain has an extensive high-speed rail network. The high-speed line between Madrid and Santiago was opened in December 2021, and it takes just over 3 hours to get from Santiago to Madrid. The Camino crosses this line 5 times. On my way home from Santiago, I took the train to Madrid and it stopped in Zamora. And it was weird to think that I had just spent 19 days walking from Zamora to Santiago, and I returned to Zamora in less than 2 hours. What I learned was that when I needed to change my train itinerary, the Renfe website wouldn't accept my credit card. So be ready to make train reservations in person at one of the stations. The albergue in Tabara had single beds, not bunk beds, plenty of space around the beds, and a chair next to each bed. If there had been hot water, it would have been considered luxurious. There was a man from Belgium we had encountered on previous days. He was taking a taxi between albergues and obviously arrived before anyone walking. He snored loudly. He had the bed in the far left corner, and I had the bed next to him. I've never been bothered by snoring in albergues before, but at 4 in the morning, everyone in our room, except the Belgian guy, was sitting up in bed wide awake. At 4:30, we gave up and got up. At 5, I left the albergue ahead of most of the others. I had never seen any point in walking before it gets light out in the morning, so I don't bring a headlamp. I just have this tiny one LED flashlight. So I followed another guy who had a headlamp for a while, but I couldn't keep up with him, so I relied on my little flashlight for the next hour or so. This picture was taken about 6:45 in the morning. So lesson learned. Walking into the stars is really cool. Bring a headlamp next time. Today I followed the arrows on the approach to the Agavanzal Reservoir, shown here, but got to an intersection without an arrow, and so I checked the Gronze Maps app to see which way to go. I was surprised to see that the app showed that I was nowhere near the Camino. So I checked Mappy, and Mappy showed that I was on one of two alternate routes through the area. But the Gronze route looked shorter, so I tried to cut over to it without backtracking too far. But the shortcuts it showed on Mappy had a big new fence across them. So I went back and followed the route on Mappy. In the end, this added about 2 kilometers to my walk on this warm afternoon. The lesson learned, you can't rely on just one single app. But after my unnecessarily long walk, I still arrived at the albergue in time to get lunch. There was a restaurant across the street that had a menu del dia, so we went there. The first course shown here was tuna pate with blueberries, toast, and strawberry jam. The next course was pork loin and mango sauce, and then dessert, then coffee or tea, followed by a choice of chupitos, after dinner liqueurs, of which some of us had several, and of course wine and bread. Not bad for 20 euros. The lesson learned was there is great food on the Camino, but it's usually not next door to the municipal albergue. Jonas was the first person I met on the Via de la Plata after leaving Sevilla. He is from Slovenia and has an accent and stature that would make him a perfect villain in a James Bond movie. But he is friendly and has a great sense of humor. When I met him, I could see that he had a severe limp and was leaning heavily on his hiking poles. He had been in a motorcycle accident several years ago, and doctors told him that he would never walk again. He set out to prove them wrong. Jonas had more time to complete his Camino, so rather than push too hard, he was going to take a short day and stop at the albergue in Momboy, while we continued on ahead of him. We took this picture thinking we would not see him again. Jonas checked into the Momboy albergue around 10 a.m., and when he went to his bed, he saw that the Belgian guy was already there. Jonas didn't want to spend another night with this guy, so Jonas left the albergue and continued on the Camino, joining the rest of us in Asterianos a few hours after all the rest of us had arrived there. While there had been several days without rain, the trail was still a muddy, swampy mess in many places, and this put me in a grumpy mood. But the words on the building returned my Camino zen. Nada más pido, el cielo sobre mí, y el camino bajo mis pies. I ask nothing more, the sky above me and the Camino below my feet. Normally our group would walk at our own paces and separate during the day, but meet up in the same albergue in the afternoon. This day we had stuck together, and it was nice touring Puebla de Sanabria and its castle together. More wet trails, but a nice stretch of single track trail through the woods for a while. I met up with our group at the local restaurant and rested a bit. Lunch wasn't going to be available for another hour or so. I decided to go to the local market to get lunch for the next day. At the little market in Lubian, the power went out. The store owner went over to the circuit breaker and tried resetting it, but nothing happened. No big deal, there was still enough light coming in through the windows. I went back to the restaurant and we had lunch inside with the windows providing enough light. We soon learned that all of Spain and Portugal were without power. This was concerning. That night I was staying at a Casa Rural a short way from the albergue. I turned off my phone to conserve the battery, but occasionally checked to see that if there was any news on the internet about the blackout. About the time it got dark out, the cell service stopped working. The lesson learned, manage battery usage carefully. You may not be able to recharge at night. The next morning, I got up and the power and cell service were still off, and those staying at the albergue had already left. I continued on the Camino alone up the ridge marking the border with Galicia. After walking about 12 kilometers, I reached the town of Villavella and looked for the local bar. I was happy to see the power was on and they had Wi-Fi. I recharged my phone and checked the news. I continued on through the Galician countryside much relieved. Enjoyed a beautiful sunrise while walking through the Galician hills leaving Agudinha. That night we stayed in a Donativo albergue. There were two bunk beds, four beds, and a mattress for the floor. We had reserved 5 spaces, but the hospitalero accidentally took a booking for one other person, so that would be
Again,
6.
again.
Jonas also planned to stay in a different albergue earlier that day, but it wasn't open, so he joined us. The hospitalero brought us 2 more mattresses, so everyone had a mattress, 3 on the floor. We had brought some food to cook, but the albergue was well stocked with food. The refrigerator was even full of beer, but not for long. So lesson learned, this was probably not an albergue I would have chosen myself, but it pays to be flexible. There might be free beer.
But you don't get naked yet. I'm just showing the premises.
Another day walking through Galician hills to a Donativo albergue. This time we bought food from the bar across the street. When we asked for some eggs, they went down the street and got fresh eggs. The eggs were fresh from underneath the hens. Francesco, goofing off for this picture, lives near Milan but was from the Amalfi Coast south of Naples. He started in Cadiz and walked the Via Augusta to Sevilla before continuing on the Via della Plata. The next morning, Linus and I walked together and discussed Camino gear, specifically shoe selection. Some people prefer boots, others hiking shoes, others trail runners. Some prefer waterproof footwear, some prefer more breathable footwear. Linus and I were both feeling smug about wearing waterproof shoes and not getting our socks wet so far. That afternoon we came to this stretch. As usual, we tried to find a dry or shallow spots on the edge of the trail to walk on. But I misjudged one step and my left foot got soaked. Then I misjudged another and my right foot got soaked. At that point, the water no longer mattered.
Matt, good? Waterproof? Camino water. Maybe try fishing.
So Linus, who took this video, soon ran out of dry land, and he too got his feet soaked. About a minute later, he was knee deep in the water. The stage leading into Orense is relatively short and flat, and almost all of it on pavement or sidewalks. But at least my shoes had dried out. Orense is a major city in the region. We checked in at the albergue, and the hospitalero recommended a good place for lunch. While the others did some sightseeing after lunch, I went to the train station and changed my Santiago to Madrid return date. While we were in line to check in at the albergue, a couple in line ahead of us were turned away when the hospitalero noticed that the last stamp was from about 60 kilometers away, and they had taken the train that day. So lesson learned, Galician albergues do check if you are walking, especially when Jonas, standing next to the hospitalero, yells down at you, "Hey Matt, how much was your taxi today?" Galicia is just a whole different place from the rest of Spain. The Junta Albergue in Seville had lights that turned on automatically outside the bathrooms. Unfortunately, some of the beds were open to the downstairs area where the lights kept coming on throughout the night. So I didn't get a lot of sleep. Another early morning start, and lesson learned, don't pick a bed near the bathrooms if the light is going to come on whenever someone walks by. I've made a distinction between the Via de la Plata and the Camino Sanabrés, but the combined routes are commonly just referred to simply as the Via de la Plata. Even in Galicia, the Sanabrés is often referred to on signs and markers as the Via de la Plata, or in Galician, Via da Prata. We continued with an easy day walking through villages of Galicia. While we could have pushed on to Santiago, we decided to stay at the albergue in Alterio, a small village with no market or restaurant. In the previous town, we picked up food and wine to cook for lunch and dinner. This is us relaxing at the albergue on the last afternoon before reaching Santiago. So lesson learned, leave room in your pack for an extra 4 bottles of wine or so. On our last day, it was a beautiful day in Galicia. This picture is about 13 kilometers from Santiago. The lesson here was that this was the nicest approach and entry into Santiago, in my opinion, compared to the Frances or Portuguese. It's rural, and then it's a very quick transition into the old town. Jonas, as usual, started walking long before sunrise and had reached Santiago well ahead of the rest of us. He waited for us at a bar just outside the old part of the city, and we had a short rest and celebration before continuing the last kilometer. Me, Nuria, Jonas, Francesco, Linus, and Lily on the Praza Obratorio. 1,007 kilometers after Sevilla, more or less. Lily and I would head home the next day. Nuria, Jonas, Francesco, and Linus would continue on to Finisterre and Muxia. Linus then went on to walk the Camino Inglés before flying home. So the final lesson learned, a little give and take, some trust, and lots of humor are important in any family, including a Camino family. Thank you.